He said he would only give me his kidney if I sign over half of the apartment. I'm dying and he knows it. This isn't a movie where everyone hugs in the end. This is my life, and it looks like it might be over soon if I don't agree to be blackmailed by my own brother. My name is Samantha 32. And right now I'm sitting in Dr. Green's waiting room, expecting news that I pretty much already know. My life has fallen apart in the last 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks ago, I was a normal person. Working in marketing, paying the mortgage on a tiny studio, and planning a vacation. Now I visit the clinic like it's my job, and my future depends on the goodwill of the person I thought loved me the most, my younger brother, Jason, 28. It all started when I simply felt under the weather. A little fatigue I blamed on a rush at work. Then the swelling started, I was constantly sleepy, and I looked like I'd been on a week-long binge even though I barely drink. My best friend, Chloe, finally dragged me to the general practitioner. Chloe is the only one who has really been there. Jason. He was busy with his very important business. When the therapist saw my blood tests, her face immediately went pale. She didn't mince words, she just said, "Samantha, you need to see a nephrologist immediately. Your kidneys. They're barely working." From that moment, everything spun at a terrifying speed. Examinations, endless queues, ultrasounds, a biopsy. The diagnosis sounded like a death sentence. Rapidly progressive glomerulonephritis. Both kidneys are failing and fast. Dr. Green, the nephrologist I'm working with, explained that I need either an urgent transplant or I'll be tied to dialysis for the rest of my days. And the rest of my days without a transplant, he said, would come much sooner than I'd like. He gave me frightening deadlines. A maximum of 6 months to live somewhat normally without surgery. A year and a half on dialysis, and the chances would dwindle daily. The first person I thought of was Jason. We are the only direct relatives left after our mother passed away 2 years ago. Our father left us when we were children, so Mom was everything. Before she died, she left us her 2-bedroom apartment in the suburbs. Jason was already living in another city, building his business, and I stayed in our hometown. To avoid selling or splitting the apartment, we agreed that I would buy him out of his half when I could. This was unofficial, just our verbal agreement, etched in the drafts of our emotions. Legally, the apartment was fully registered in my name. That's what Mom decided, believing I was more responsible and would manage her legacy better. But I never questioned that half by right belonged to him. And so when I called Jason, completely distraught, and told him about the diagnosis, silence hung in the phone line. Not shock, not compassion. Just a long, strange, calculated silence. I, teary-eyed, explained the situation, asking if he could come and get tested for compatibility. I didn't even hint that he'd be the donor, just to check. The odds were 50-50, but he was the only person I could count on. He arrived 3 days later. He didn't come to see me at the hospital, but directly to my home. I was there because Dr. Green allowed me to rest before the examination started, provided I strictly followed the diet and routine. He sat opposite me in Mom's armchair, adjusted his expensive shirt, and said it. He said it with an expression like he was reading me the terms of a loan agreement, not saving his sister's life. "Look, Sam, I love you, but I have my own things going on. Getting tested, then surgery, recovery. That all takes time, and time is money. My business is just now picking up. I'm willing. I know I'm most likely a match. I'll get tested, go through the surgery, and give you my kidney." I felt my heart sink into an abyss. I had already started thanking him, tears streaming down my face from relief and gratitude. But he raised his hand. "But there's one condition. You sign over half of Mom's apartment to me. Right now, legally. You know it's my share anyway, but I want guarantees. I'm risking my health. That's the price. Without it, I'm sorry. Good luck with dialysis." That's it. My brother. The only person who could save me without months of waiting on the donor list and without the risk of incompatibility, offered me a deal. A deal where on one side is my life and on the other half of the home where I grew up and which was my last link to Mom. Right now, I'm waiting for the results of the first stage of compatibility testing. Not his. Mine. Just confirmation that I really am this close to the edge. Jason left, saying he was waiting for my call with a positive answer and the notary's contact information. The kidney function test results came back 3 days after Jason's visit. Dr. Green was careful with his words, but the data was blunt. My estimated glomerular filtration rate, eGFR, was critically low, dropping faster than they had predicted a week prior. He sat me down and outlined the options again, this time with more urgency. Dialysis was no longer a future threat. It was a looming certainty in the next few weeks, unless I could get a transplant. He casually mentioned the national donor list, explaining the agonizing wait times and the low odds of a perfect match. I knew what he was doing. He was subtly pushing me toward the one viable option I had. A living relative. A relative named Jason. I didn't tell Dr. Green about Jason's deal. How do you explain to a professional doctor that your brother, your blood, is holding your life hostage over real estate? It felt too sordid, too much like a cheap melodrama. But every night, lying awake and watching the ceiling fan spin, the phrase echoed in my head. I want guarantees. I called Chloe that evening. Chloe works as a paralegal and is brilliant at cutting through emotional noise to the cold, hard facts. I didn't hold back. I told her everything. The diagnosis, Jason's proposition, and the crushing weight of having to choose between my last piece of mom and the rest of my life. Sam, listen to me. Chloe's voice was sharp, a grounding force in my spiral. The fact that the apartment is legally yours is paramount. Jason is trying to capitalize on your guilt and your weakened state. This isn't about the rightful share anymore. This is about leverage. Your life is the collateral. She advised me to stall. To tell Jason I needed time to handle the paperwork and get a proper legal appraisal of the property before making any decisions. The appraisal was the key. It would buy me time to look for alternatives, time to process the moral rot of the situation. I didn't want to give him the apartment not because of the money, but because of the audacity. It was the ultimate betrayal, the calculation in his eyes when he made the demand. The next morning I called Jason. I kept my voice flat, professional, masking the tremor in my hands. I told him I was moving forward with his request, but that since this involved a significant legal transfer, I needed to hire a lawyer and get an official appraisal to ensure everything was done correctly and fairly for both of us. He didn't sound pleased. There was a pause that felt like a metal door slamming shut. Fairly? Sam, you know what's fair. The apartment is worth at least $400,000 now. I'm asking for my half, $200,000, and I'm giving you a life-saving organ. That's more than fair. His wording was meticulous. He wasn't demanding the apartment. He was demanding the equivalent value of his half in exchange for the surgery. A transaction. He framed it as a business deal where the currency was real estate and the product was his kidney. He didn't acknowledge the ethical nightmare he was creating. I just agreed to the appraisal, promised to find a lawyer by the end of the week, and hung up before I screamed. The following week was a blur of doctor appointments and meetings with a real estate appraiser named Marcus. Marcus was professional and detached, which I appreciated. He walked through the apartment, meticulously noting the condition of the kitchen cabinets, the age of the windows, and the location. While he measured the master bedroom, Mom's room, a wave of pure physical fatigue hit me. My energy levels were plummeting. I leaned against the doorframe trying to focus on his drone about comparable sales and market trends, but all I could hear was Jason's voice in my head. One evening I started digging through old documents, searching for anything. A note, a previous will. Anything that detailed Mom's reasoning for putting the apartment solely in my name. I found an old worn ledger tucked away in a desk drawer. It was Mom's personal finance log from about 10 years ago, before Jason left for college. Flipping through the pages, I found entries that stopped my breath. There were numerous large withdrawals, checks written out to Jason's business startup capital, Jason's tuition advance, and a huge entry labeled loan repayment Jason's car accident. The total amount listed, meticulously tracked by Mom, was staggering. If I factored in the money Mom had quietly given Jason over the years for various emergencies and investments, money he never repaid and she never asked for back, the total was already close to, if not exceeding, the value of his supposed half of the apartment. Mom hadn't just put the apartment in my name because I was responsible. She had done it because she knew deep down that she had already given Jason his inheritance piece by painful piece, to bail him out of one self-inflicted crisis after another. The emotional realization hit me harder than the diagnosis itself. Jason wasn't just demanding his share. He was demanding a share he had already secretly received, knowing I didn't know the full story. He was exploiting my trust and my lack of knowledge about Mom's quiet sacrifices. I held that ledger, a thin, worn book, and realized this was the key. This was the one piece of leverage I had against his emotional and moral extortion. But using it meant tearing apart the last vestiges of our family relationship, revealing a decade of Mom's hidden pain, and exposing Jason's calculated deceit. I knew I couldn't delay much longer. The dialysis appointment was tentatively scheduled for the end of the month if no donor was secured. The clock was running out. The discovery of Mom's ledger didn't bring comfort. It brought clarity and a deep, cold rage. It replaced the crippling guilt with a hardening resolve. I was no longer fighting my brother over a legacy. I was fighting a thief who was trying to steal my life and rewrite my mother's history of sacrifice. I spent the next 2 days meticulously scanning every relevant page of that ledger, creating a digital file I stored on multiple encrypted drives. This wasn't just my defense. It was my tactical nuclear option. The appraisal came back a few days later, confirming the apartment's value at $415,000. Jason's demanded share was now slightly over $207,000. I called him, pretending to be fully on board with the transaction, but using the new, slightly higher number as a point of contention. "So the appraisal came in," I said, my voice carefully neutral, like I was discussing quarterly earnings. "The value is $415,000. That makes your half $207,500. I've spoken to the lawyer, Mr. Hayes. He says we can start the deed transfer next week, but we need to sign a formal agreement detailing the terms of the organ donation, obviously. The hospital requires documentation of the donor's consent before they even schedule the final compatibility tests." I was playing his game, business for business, but I was using the hospital's strict protocols as a lever. Jason was banking on the legal transfer being fast. The medical process was what actually took time, and he needed that transplant confirmation to begin his own recovery planning, which I suspected involved booking a vacation with his newfound wealth. His response was immediate and chillingly practical. "Sam, the money comes first. The moment you sign the final papers, I call Dr. Green. Not a second before. You need to prove you're serious. A signed agreement for the organ is worthless if the deed isn't transferred and notarized. I want the money secured, then I secure your life. My business partner Robert is handling the legal side for me. He'll meet with your lawyer Hayes to finalize the transfer." This was the escalation I needed. The tension was now physically palpable. Every phone call felt like a negotiation with a terrorist. My kidney function was still rapidly declining. "Dear." Green was talking about installing a shunt for the eventual dialysis access. The feeling of constant bone-deep exhaustion was my new normal. Every breath was a stark reminder of the ticking clock. I decided to strike. I couldn't afford any more delays. I agreed to have Mr. Hayes meet Robert, Jason's business partner, at the lawyer's office to review the deed transfer documents the very next day. I didn't tell Mr. Hayes the full sordid story. I just told him I had a complicated family agreement, and I needed him to subtly introduce one specific document into the review stack. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. I was too weak and anxious to attend, so I waited by the phone at Chloe's apartment. Chloe had encouraged me to call Jason just before the meeting. "Make him sweat a little, Sam. Let him think he's won and then pull the rug." I called Jason 15 minutes before the meeting. "Jason," I whispered, injecting a sob into my voice that wasn't entirely fake. "I'm scared. I signed the transfer papers. Hayes has them. Just promise me you'll do this, right? You won't back out once you have the deed?" I laid the trap, appealing to the last shred of familial decency I hoped he possessed. He let out a short, cynical laugh. "Don't be dramatic, Sam. We had a deal. I always keep my deals. Now relax. Robert will handle everything. You'll have my kidney soon." I hung up, my heart pounding against my ribs, convinced I had just handed him everything. Then I waited. The next hour was the longest of my life. I paced Chloe's living room, imagining Robert signing the papers, shaking Mr. Hayes' hand, and Jason finally owning half of Mom's last gift to me. The thought made me physically sick, adding to the list of symptoms my failing kidneys were causing. Finally, the phone rang. It was Mr. Hayes. His voice was calm, but there was an undertone of surprise. Samantha, the meeting did not go as planned. Mr. Robert was professional initially. We reviewed the deed, the legal language for the transfer of the apartment's ownership. Then I asked him to review the Exhibit B, which details the financial history of the property to ensure full transparency, for the record, as you requested. My mouth was dry. And what did he say, Mr. Hayes? Exhibit B was the scanned, certified copy of your mother's personal finance ledger, Samantha. Specifically, the pages detailing the $215,000 in non-repaid loans and advances given to Jason over the last decade, with Mom's handwriting and dates. I pointed out that, according to this accounting, Jason had already received the equivalent of his share of the property in advance, making his claim here void in any court if we proceeded with this transfer. Mr. Robert. He took one look at the total and immediately called his client. He then politely but very quickly gathered his papers and left. He said, and I quote, "The terms of the agreement have clearly changed. We'll be in touch." The silence that followed was electric. I hadn't given him the apartment. I had shown him the evidence. The ball was back in Jason's court, but now he knew I was not a desperate, dying woman begging for a favor. I was a desperate, dying woman who was holding the full, devastating truth of his past greed and Mom's protective love. He knew I had the ledger. He knew the $207,500 was a fraud. I looked at my reflection in Chloe's window. My skin was pallid, my eyes sunken, but there was a flicker of something new steel. I knew Jason would call. The pressure was now intense. He knew I was dying and I knew he was a liar. The choice was no longer about the apartment's value. It was about whether he valued my life more than his exposed deceit. The next 24 hours would decide everything. Jason called me 3 hours after his lawyer, Robert, stormed out of Mr. Hayes's office. I didn't answer right away. I let the phone ring twice, just to let the full weight of the ledger sink in. When I finally picked up, his voice was no longer that of a calm, calculating businessman. It was harsh, laced with fury, and brittle with exposed panic. "What the hell was that, Sam? What was that garbage you sent Robert? A bunch of old fabricated checks? You think you can blackmail me?" I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the metallic tang in my mouth that was a constant companion now. My energy was fading fast, but my voice held steady, cold as the marble countertop I was leaning against. "It wasn't garbage, Jason. It was Mom's ledger. Certified copies. She kept receipts for everything, especially for the $215,000 she fronted you over 10 years. Your college tuition. Your startup capital. The car you wrecked and lied about. You've had your inheritance, Jason. You wiped it out years ago. The apartment is legally mine and morally, it's the only thing left of hers I have." The line went silent for a moment. It wasn't the calculated silence from before. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a man caught in a devastating lie. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted from rage to a desperate, sickening plea. "Okay, fine. Maybe that's true. But what does that matter now, Sam? You're dying. You need a kidney. I'm still your brother. Look, forget the money. Forget the deed. I'll come tomorrow. I'll get the tests done. I'll give you the kidney. Just don't tell anyone else about that book. Please. It will ruin my business. Robert already thinks I'm a joke." The shift was jarring. He was willing to concede the apartment, the $207,500, just to bury the evidence of his past. For a brief, terrifying second I considered it. Give him his secrecy and I get my life. A clean exchange. But the moral filth of what he had just done, trying to sell me my life back with an organ I was entitled to anyway, clung to me. "It's too late for that, Jason," I said. "You used my dying condition to try and steal from me. You made a cold-blooded calculation. Now I want a promise, not a bargain. You come, you get tested, and if you're a match, you donate. No conditions. No secrets. No talk about the apartment. Just do the right thing for once." He hesitated. I could hear him breathing heavily, the sound amplified by the phone. This was the moment of truth. My survival depended on the outcome of this conversation. I'll be there tomorrow morning," he finally choked out. "Tell Dr. Green I'm coming in for the initial screening." No money, Sam. Just for you. I hung up, exhausted but victorious. I called Dr. Green's office, my hands shaking, and told the secretary that my brother would be arriving for the donor compatibility screening first thing the next day. The news, even just the potential, felt like a rush of fresh air. Jason showed up at the hospital at 9 a.m. I insisted on being there, watching the process, needing to see the commitment in his eyes. He looked tired, angry, and utterly defeated. He didn't look at me, just marched past me to the reception desk. He gave his name, Jason Thorne, and went back for the preliminary blood work. I sat in the waiting room, weak and trembling, watching the clock tick. Hope, a feeling I hadn't experienced in weeks, was an almost painful pressure in my chest. 2 agonizing hours later, a nurse called out his name, but Jason wasn't in the waiting room. A moment later, Dr. Green emerged, looking grim. "Samantha, I need to speak with you privately. In my office, please." My blood ran cold. The defeat in Jason's eyes. I realized it wasn't just about the money. In his office, Dr. Green sat me down, his expression serious. "Your brother was cooperative, Samantha. We drew the blood. But during the routine physical and history, there was a complication. A significant one." I looked over his file and his medical history he provided. He paused, gathering his words carefully. "Samantha, Jason cannot be your donor. Not for a compatibility issue, but because he is medically ineligible to donate any organ." I stared at him, my mind unable to process the words. Ineligible? But why? He's young, he looks healthy. Dr. Green tapped the confidential report on his desk. He admitted, under direct questioning, that he underwent a kidney donation 6 years ago. Not a full donation, but an intended one that resulted in a complicated nephrectomy, where part of his left kidney had to be removed due to an acute vascular complication during the procedure. He's functioning fine now, but we have strict rules. We cannot, under any circumstances, allow a person with a single partially compromised kidney to donate their only healthy one. He is, to put it plainly, a single kidney patient himself, recovering from a near-total loss of the other one due to an accident during a previous attempt to donate. I leaned back, the air knocked out of my lungs. $207,500. The apartment. The leverage. The moral blackmail. It was all a complete, utter sham. "Doctor," I whispered, forcing the words out. "Does this mean he knew?" Dr. Green looked at me with deep sympathy. Based on the clear surgical scars on his side, and his reluctance to disclose his full history until pressed, yes. "Samantha, your brother knew he couldn't donate to you. He has known it for 6 years. He tried to sell you an organ he didn't possess. He was selling you a lie for a portion of your inheritance." The reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. The money wasn't the motive, it was the cover. He was trying to profit from my death using an empty promise, hoping I would sign over the deed before the medical screening revealed his physical impossibility. The sheer depth of his betrayal, the calculation, the willingness to let me die believing he was my only hope, was monstrous. My body felt heavier than it ever had before. I was back at square one, but now I was not just dying. I was utterly, devastatingly alone. The world went silent around me. I didn't cry, there was nothing left. Grief wasn't a sudden burst of tears. It was a cold, suffocating blanket of emptiness. My brother, the man I shared childhood secrets and a mother's love with, had not just exploited my impending death. He had manufactured false hope to commit grand theft. He wasn't just selfish, he was a hollow, calculated monster. I left Dr. Green's office, walking past the quiet waiting room. Jason was gone. He hadn't waited for the results or the confrontation. He'd made his calculated exit the moment the truth was exposed. The sheer speed with which he had disappeared spoke volumes about his guilt. I went home. Not to Chloe's apartment, but back to Mom's place. I stood in the middle of the living room, the room Jason tried to steal with a lie, and the ledger felt like a hot, damning brick in my hand. I wanted to call the police, call Robert, call everyone and scream the truth, but what was the point? My kidneys were failing. Jason's treachery had cost me valuable time. Time I had wasted fighting a legal battle over an organ that didn't exist instead of actively searching for a real donor. I called Mr. Hayes and canceled the deed transfer. I then instructed him to draft a letter to Jason, officially severing all contact and informing him that any future attempt to claim a share of the apartment would be met with a public disclosure of Mom's ledger and the facts surrounding his fraudulent offer. I didn't want the money or the guilt. I wanted the silence of knowing he couldn't hurt me again. The next day I was back in the hospital, but this time I wasn't there to wait for Jason. I was there to be listed on the National Donor Registry. Dr. Green was direct. I was now on the accelerated urgent list due to the rapid decline in my eGFR. He explained the cold mathematics of my situation. The wait could be months, maybe even a year, and my body simply didn't have that kind of time. The reality of dialysis was now days away, not weeks. "We need a miracle, Samantha," he said, his voice softer than usual. A miracle. My miracle had been standing in my mother's living room, wearing an expensive shirt, and trying to sell me vapor. The following morning, I woke up with the crushing weight of the illness making it impossible to move quickly. I dragged myself to the kitchen and looked at the picture on the fridge. A faded snapshot of a younger Jason and me, grinning wildly on a childhood vacation. I took it down, looked at his happy, honest face and realized that person had died long ago, replaced by the ghost who valued $200,000 more than my actual life. I didn't tear the picture. I just placed it face down on the counter. Erasing him wasn't necessary. He had erased himself. That afternoon I had my first dialysis session. It was an utterly dehumanizing, exhausting process. Hours spent tethered to a machine that hummed quietly, filtering the poison my own body couldn't handle anymore. Watching the dark, viscous liquid flow through the tubes, I realized this was my future. A quiet, sterile existence chained to a machine, hoping for a random phone call that might change everything. The physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional numbness. Jason never called back. Not a text, not an apology, nothing. The silence was his final, damning admission of guilt. The hardest part wasn't the pain or the fatigue. It was the realization that I had spent the last month, the most critical time of my life, focused on a battle over a debt that didn't exist, instead of accepting the reality of my condition. Jason's lie had consumed my focus and my remaining strength. A week later I was hooked up to the machine again, staring out the window at the setting sun. I thought about the apartment now safely mine. I was dying, but I was not a thief. I had protected Mom's legacy, but I had lost my only living family. Was the moral victory worth the physical cost? I didn't have an answer. All I had was the rhythmic, monotonous sound of the dialysis machine, marking the slow, deliberate passing of my precious time. Then, just as the nurse was preparing to disconnect me, her pager buzzed. She glanced at it, then quickly looked back at me, her eyes suddenly wide. She grabbed the phone on the wall. Her side of the conversation was rapid, hushed, and intense. She hung up, her face pale, and walked over to me, her hand resting gently on my arm. "Samantha," she breathed, her voice trembling slightly. "I need you to stay calm. We just got a match. A perfect O-positive match. The hospital found a deceased donor. It's a miracle, just like the doctor said. We need to prep you for surgery. Now." I lay there, the machine still humming beside me, a sudden brutal irony washing over me. After a month of fighting for a kidney from a living relative who was selling me a lie, my salvation came from a total stranger. A person I would never know, who made a real sacrifice. I was free not because of family loyalty or legal leverage, but because of pure, random, anonymous chance. The tears finally came then, not from pain, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization of the difference between true sacrifice and calculated greed. I was being wheeled to the operating room, the hope of a second chance surging through me. I didn't know if the transplant would take, or if I would survive the surgery. I didn't know if I would ever see Jason again. All I knew was that I was fighting for my life, armed with the knowledge that my brother's betrayal had been the lowest point, and a stranger's gift was the start of the rest of my story. Lying on the gurney, watching the bright lights blur above me, the only question that truly mattered remained unanswered. If I survived, what would I do with a life saved by anonymity, after being nearly killed by blood?